Numbers 7, verse 10. We read there, the leaders offered the dedication offering for the altar when it was anointed. So the leaders offered their offering before the altar. All right, so you may be thinking, wait a minute, what? That's not Hanukkah. What are you talking about? That's the book of Numbers. And we know the book of Numbers, chapter 7, it has like a zillion verses, and they all repeat. We already said earlier in our service that the word itself, Hanukkah, means dedication. And what happened over the story of Hanukkah was that when the Maccabees, when the people of Israel, led by the Maccabees, reconquered Jerusalem and the temple, and they went in and cleansed the temple, they had to rededicate the altar because the Greeks had offered a pig on the altar. So the rededication of the altar during Hanukkah had to be exactly the same as it was in the Torah. For the altar to become clean again, consecrated, holy, and continue to function in the temple. So the background to Hanukkah has to start in the Torah. So this is the word that we have here, that the leaders offered the dedication offering for the altar. So this is speaking of the dedication of the altar and how they came and they brought gifts and they found a way to honor the dedication of the altar. So this is the origin of the word, the first time it is used in the Torah. So you have to, in order to understand Hanukkah, you have to understand the background. What is it all about? What is it that we are dedicating? Okay, specifically, we're rededicating the altar that was consecrated in the Torah. All right, so Hanukkah has to begin in the Torah, and it does, because the concept of it comes from it, the dedication of the temple, the altar, the tabernacle. What about Hanukkah in the prophets? If you recall, the prophets is organized into subgroups. So the first one is the former prophets, and then the second one is the latter prophets. The latter prophets, it's easy for us to connect with it because it is actually the prophets as we know them. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. The former prophets, or the earlier prophets, are a little difficult because these are books that we don't think of them as prophetic. For instance, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Those are the former or the earlier prophets. So you see, it's not so much that there is a prophet or that there is a prophet preaching and speaking, but the writing themselves is prophetic. And they speak to Israel, continuing with the plot of the Torah, which is, now in the prophets, will Israel have faith to remain in the land and not be exiled? So in the Torah, will Israel have faith to possess? And in the prophets, will Israel have faith to continue to possess the land and not be exiled from it? So we find then in the book of Kings, we find the concept again of the dedication. So come with me to 1 Kings 8. 1 Kings 8:54. We read that Solomon, it said, when Solomon had finished praying this entire prayer, right, the prayer that we know that he prayed at the dedication of the temple, when he had finished this entire prayer in supplication to the Lord, he arose from before the altar of the Lord, the dedication of the altar, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread toward heaven, And he stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. Not one word has failed of all his good promise, which he promised through Moses his servant. May the Lord our God be with us, and as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to himself, to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his ordinances, which he commanded our fathers. And may these words of mine, with which I have made supplication before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as each day requires, so that all the people of all the earth may know that the Lord is God, there is no one else. Let your heart, therefore, be wholly devoted to the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as at this day. Now the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. Solomon offered for the sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered to the Lord, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. That was a great oneg they had. So the king and all the sons of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. Did you read that? So the king and all the sons of Israel, Hanukkah, dedicated the house of the Lord. On the same day, the king consecrated the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord, because there he offered the burnt offering and the grain offering and the fat of the peace offerings. For the bronze altar that was before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offering and the grain offering and the fat of the peace offerings. So Solomon observed the feast at that time. What feast was that? Do you know? It says that he observed the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt, before the Lord our God, for 7 days. And 7 more days, even 14 days. What feast is this? Do you know? Well, here's the thing. There is one feast that is actually called the feast. And that's what we have here. The Solomon celebrated the feast. Hahag. That is Sukkot. That's the feast of Sukkot. So they celebrated it for 7 days and then another 7 days. Now watch this, verse 66. It says, on the 8th day, now we know Sukkot has an 8th day. On the 8th day, he sent the people away and they blessed the king. Then they went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had shown to David his servant and to Israel his people. Okay, I thought I had included this verse here, but let's jump real quick to 2 Chronicles 7. Mario, if you can, I'm going to throw you a little curve here. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 10. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 10. It's just a few chapters away, right, from 1 King. So, 2 Chronicles 7:10, it says, let's get it on verse 8. Verse 8. Mario took a couple of weeks off, and now I'm making him pay for it. Now I'm really giving it to him. Verse 8. So Solomon observed the feast. Oh, now you know what feast it is, because it says the feast. He observed the feast at that time for 7 days, and all Israel with him, a very great assembly, who came from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt. So we know this is a parallel passage, right? Verse 9. On the 8th day, they held a solemn assembly for the dedication of the altar. There's the word Hanukkah again. For the dedication of the altar, they observed 7 days, and the feast 7 days. For the dedication of the altar, they observed 7 days, and then they observed 7 days for the feast. So in total, 14 days. Verse 10. Then, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, you see, that's the confirmation. We aren't in the 7th month. It is the Feast of Sukkot. But there's a little bit of chronological problem here. I don't know if you caught it. It says, on the 23rd day of the 7th month. Wait, I thought you said it lasted for 14 days. I'm confused. Because here's the thing. Sukkot begins on the 15th day of the 7th month. So how can you have the feast for 14 days and still end it on the 22nd? Count with me, because I'm very slow. My math is like super slow. So if you start the feast on the 15th, then you have 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21st, 22nd, that's the 8th day. And on the 23rd, the feast is already done. That will be the 9th day if you were counting. But it says that they celebrated it 14 days. Okay, here's what they actually did. They started it, they did the dedication of the altar 7 days before. Now, here's what's amazing. That as they are dedicating the altar, now guess what day falls within that? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur begins on the 10th of the month, and Sukkot on the 15th. So that's 5 days. So you had to have started the dedication of the altar on the 8th of the month. So you had 2 days to dedicate the altar for it to be ready for Yom Kippur, and then you continue, and then you tie it in with Sukkot, and you end it on the 23rd. So they actually celebrated it, and they dedicated the temple right on time for Yom Kippur. Isn't that amazing? And here, the thought here is dedication. Even among the feasts, right? The feast of, well, actually, Yom Kippur is not a feast, but the observance of Yom Kippur, the celebration of Sukkot, and yet Hanukkah is all over this. The concept of the dedication is all over this. Of course, Hanukkah had not happened, right? It's going to happen much, much later. There is a psalm, since I already brought you over to Chronicles. So remember, 1 Kings is part of the prophets. So I'm showing you Hanukkah in the whole Bible. So we saw it in the Torah. We saw it in 1 Kings, which is part of the prophets. And now we ventured out into 2 Chronicles, which is part of the writings. So the writings, the bigger book, the most characteristic book of the writings is actually the Psalms. So Yeshua said in Luke 24, which we were reading today, he mentioned the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms. So you call the totality of it by one of its parts. Instead of saying the writings, he called it the Psalms, because it's the characteristic book of the writings, because it's the longest one. Psalm 30, I want you to read with me here. Before verse 1, there is an inscription. And the inscription is part of Scripture. I don't know if you've ever thought of that. But at the beginning of Psalm 30, it says, a psalm, a song at the dedication of the house, a psalm of David. So it uses the word Hanukkah, the dedication of the house, but David wrote it. Wait. The dedication of the house, and David wrote it, but didn't Solomon build the house? Wasn't David already dead? Yes. But who commissioned the building of the temple? And who gave the most for that temple to be built? David did. So he wrote a psalm to be performed at the dedication of the temple. Now, I want you to read this psalm with imagination, okay? With imagination. Because this psalm becomes something amazing when we read it the way I'm going to suggest to you. I want us to read it not as if it is David saying these words, not as if it is you and me saying these words. We read Psalms that way, right? But I want you to read it as if it is the temple speaking. I know. That's why I'm asking your imagination. But I want you to think the temple is speaking here. And here's what the temple says. Psalm 30. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up and have not let my enemies rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you healed me. O Lord, you have brought up my soul from Sheol. You have kept me alive, that I would not go down to the pit. Sing praise to the Lord, you his godly ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment. His favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. Isn't that amazing? You remember when the ark was taken by the Philistines? It was brought into the temple of Dagon. And the next day, the priests of Dagon came into their sanctuary, and they found Dagon face down in front of the ark of the Lord. Dagon bowed down, bend the knee and bow down before the God of heaven. And they quickly put him right back in his place. And the next morning, Dagon was headless, and even his hands were cut off. That's what you would do when a king would conquer another king. They would cut off their head and their hands. David cut off Goliath's head. But who did that? The Lord himself. So the ark of the Lord was taken in exile. Wow. That's deep right there. In the book of Samuel, the prophets, this is a sign to Israel. And yet, even in exile, the ark of the Lord triumphed over his enemies. And they had to bow down before him. And they themselves paid to bring the ark back to the land. Isn't that amazing? All of this is significant for Israel, because the message of the prophets is, Israel, be careful. I will take you into exile, just like the ark itself went into exile. But even if I do, and when I do, I will bring you back, and I will make them pay for it. All right. Verse 6. Because here the temple is weeping. The temple was destroyed once, and then again. And the whole world today fights over that little piece of real estate, that mount called Zion, the Temple Mount. That is the world's number one problem. That's where the temple goes. That's where the presence of God belongs. Verse 6, now as for me, I said in my prosperity, I will never be moved. O Lord, by your favor, and this is what the people of Israel will say in the time of Jeremiah, for instance. The temple will never be destroyed. What are you talking about? Are you for our enemies? O Lord, by your favor, you have made my mountain to stand strong. you hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I called, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my blood if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it declare your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me, O Lord. Be my helper. You have turned for me my mourning into dancing. You have loosened my sackcloth and girded me with gladness, that my soul may sing praise to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. All right, so a psalm for the dedication, a Hanukkah song. This is the first Hanukkah song that anybody ever wrote. And it's right there in the writing. So Hanukkah in the Torah, Hanukkah in the prophets, Hanukkah in the writings, the dedication. All right. Continuing in the writings, I want us to read Ezra chapter 6. Because what is Ezra going to do as he comes back from Babylon? He's going to rebuild the temple and rededicate the altar. We continue with the theme of the dedication, the Hanukkah theme. So Ezra 6:14, it says, "And the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai and the prophet Zechariah, the son of Iddo." Wait a minute. These guys lived at the same time. Isn't that amazing? Zechariah and Haggai, they are prophesying to the leaders of Israel, encouraging them to continue and finish the rebuilding of the temple and to dedicate it. So when they completed it now, we read here in Ezra what happened when they completed it. Verse 15. This temple was completed on the third day of the month Adar. Do you know what month that is? That is the month of Purim, the feast of Esther. Purim is on the 14th day, and they completed it on the third day. This was just a little before Purim. So Purim is going to be just a few more years down the road from this time here. So they completed it, verse 15, on the third day of the month of Adar, and it was the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. And the sons of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication to the house of God with joy. That's the word Hanukkah right there. They celebrated the dedication of the house. Verse 17. They offered for the dedication, for the Hanukkah of this temple of gold of God, 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, corresponding to the number of the tribes of Israel. Then they appointed the priests to their divisions and the Levites in their order for the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. The exiles, verse 19, observed the Passover on the 14th of the first month, So the month of Adar is the month right before the month of Nisan. And Purim is on Adar 14, and Passover is on Nisan 14, just 1 month in between the two. So these guys, they've dedicated the rebuilt temple, and then a month later, they had Passover. So now we see Hanukkah in the midst of the spring feasts, Purim and Passover. All right, so what about Hanukkah in the Gospels? Oh, you thought I was going to stay in the Hebrew Bible, huh? How about Hanukkah in the Gospels? Well, Matthew 24, verse 1. Look at what it says. You know this passage. 24:1, it says, Yeshua came out to the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." The temple will be destroyed. If you have the destruction of the temple, at some point later, you're going to have the rebuilding and the rededication of the temple. So look what it says in verse 9, Matthew 24:9. "Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name." This is the persecution, just like it was during the actual time of the Maccabees. Verse 10, "At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another." When you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that's exactly what happened. A great fall away, Jewish people who betrayed their God and their covenant. They actually reversed their circumcision. They actually did that. That's how far away they went from the covenant, because the Greek built a gymnasium, or actually the Jews who wanted Greek culture, they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem. And I don't know if you knew that, but in the ancient times, the Greeks, they practiced sports in the gymnasium in the nude. So you wanted to hide the fact that you were a Jew. Come on, guys. We can all see you had a surgery. Bad plastic surgery. Bad plastic surgery. All right. Verse 11. "Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." Verse 15, still speaking about Hanukkah. Look what it says in verse 15. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." Let the reader understand. "Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains," just like the Maccabees. When you see that they put up an idol to this king in the temple, flee to the mountains. That's what the Maccabees did. But this idea of the abomination of desolation, this setting up of a image to be worshipped of the king that comes to conquer, that is Hanukkah. And yet, it is also the Antichrist. So now we're not speaking just about the dedication, as we saw it in the Torah and the prophets and in the writings. Now we're speaking of the actual happenings of Hanukkah and how they project into the future prophetically. The Antichrist, the anti-Messiah, will be a figure like what happened in Hanukkah. So we have Hanukkah in the Gospels. Luke 21:20. Luke says it in slightly different terms. Verse 20, it says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near." The word desolation here is the same Greek word used in Matthew when it talks about the abomination of desolation. So they're talking about the same event. Here, Luke, it makes it gives us a detail that I find fascinating, because he says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. This is an invasion of Israel. Coming, these nations coming, gathering in the valley of Armageddon, to march up to and invade Jerusalem. So when you see these armies surrounding Jerusalem, you know that this man is about to come in and set up an image of himself and desecrate the temple. Wait, but Yeshua, didn't you just say that the temple was going to be destroyed? That's why he says, Matthew says, not Yeshua, Matthew says, let the reader understand. Let the reader understand. It's like, wake up, buddy. I'm saying things here that you need to put together here. Yes, the temple will be destroyed, the second temple, but there will be another temple which this man is going to desecrate as well. So, Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. Her desolation is near. Verse 21. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave. And those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Written where? Where do we read about the desolation that is going to happen? The setting up of a idol in the temple. Where do we read that? Okay, you read it in Maccabees, but that's not scripture. It's history. It's Jewish history. You read it in Daniel. That's where you read it. So it's almost like, wait, you know, we started out with Hanukkah is not in the Hebrew Bible. And then I kind of did a sleight of hand with you, and I said, hey, the word is here, the word is there, the word is over there. But the actual, if you were to say to me, yeah, but you didn't say the actual Hanukkah story, it's actually not in the Hebrew Bible. It is in Daniel. It's right there in Daniel. So we're going to come back to Daniel in a moment. Verse 24, Luke 21:24. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So I want you to keep that verse in mind, because we're going to go back. We're going to look at another scripture in a moment that ties back with this. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot. We'll come back to that. I need to show you first, though, Hanukkah in the Epistles. I told you, my message is titled Hanukkah in the whole Bible. I was not exaggerating. So we've seen it in the Torah, in the prophets, in the writings, in the Gospels, now in the Epistles. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 1. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah and our gathering together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit of a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Don't be fooled by people that are saying that the Lord already came. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first. Yeshua said that. Many will fall away. And that was a reference to Jewish people during the time of the Maccabees walking away from the covenant. So, unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness, that's the Antichrist, is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. That's Hanukkah. Right there in the epistles. All right, I have one more. It has to be in Revelation. Now, of course it is in Revelation. It is all over the book of Revelation. So we have Hanukkah, in effect, in the whole Bible. So let's take a look at Revelation chapter 13. I'm going to read the whole chapter. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems or crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Keep that in mind, like a leopard. And his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw, the dragon is Satan, by the way. This beast composed of all these animals is the Antichrist. Verse 3. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? And who is able to wage war with him?" If you don't catch this, when it says "who is like," in Hebrew that is mikamocha. When we sing, "Who is like you, O Lord?" that they're attributing the same kind of worship to the beast. Verse 5. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. 42 months is 3.5 years. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, his temple, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Verse 7. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life, of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear, meaning believe in the Lamb. Do not be found outside of that book. Verse 10. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance of the faith and the faith of the saints. Verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and had come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand and on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell, except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number of is that of man, and his number is 666. Right? We can take this into so many directions, but I know that you need to go to lunch, so I'm going to be respectful of that, and so do I. So this is Hanukkah all over. The beast who comes, the Antichrist, who is going to take his seat in the temple of God. Hanukkah is in the whole Bible. Let's now go back to Daniel. Because in Daniel we find actual details in prophecy about Hanukkah, about the actual events of Hanukkah. So, a couple of things we need to know about Daniel. Daniel is written, the first chapter in Hebrew, chapters 8 through 12 in Hebrew, but chapters 3 to 7 are written in Aramaic. Now, Aramaic at the time was like English today. So it was the world's language. It was the language of commerce. When Daniel writes in Aramaic, he is writing to the kings and about the kings of the nations. When he writes in Hebrew, he is writing to the Jewish people. So in chapter 1, he writes about Daniel and how they were taken captive and how they preserved themselves. Even in the middle of tribulation, they were faithful to the covenant. That is prefiguring the end times by way of Hanukkah. Just like the Maccabees, so was Daniel. And the latter part, chapters 8 through 12, it speaks about the nations, but to the Jewish people, and it goes into specific prophecy concerning the Messiah in chapter 9 and his return. In chapter 11, we have a whole lot of details, very difficult to follow, but it speaks of the Greek Empire and how it splits and eventually comes one who is going to go into the temple, and is the one that we read of in Maccabees, who is actually a figure of the Antichrist. All of that is in Daniel. So when someone says to you that Hanukkah is not in the Hebrew Bible, you just smile nice and don't tell them anything. All right. Second thing I want us to see in Daniel is what scholars call a chiastic construction. What do I mean by that? Well, it is a form of writing and actually speaking, telling stories to help us remember the story, so that the first line goes with the last, the second goes with the second from the last, and then in the middle, they two relate together. So first and last relate, the middle ones relate, and then the heart of it relates to each other. That helps remember it. So what we have in Daniel is this, and specifically in the part that is written in Aramaic. In this part, chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, here's what we have. We have that chapter 2 goes right along with chapter 7. So I'm gonna trust in your memory of Daniel, the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel is very memorable in itself. There is this huge image that Nebuchadnezzar has in his dream, right? The head of gold and the chest and all of that. So that's chapter 2, is the dream of the statue that speaks of the Gentile kingdoms. The dreams about the statue that speaks of Gentile kingdoms. But in chapter 7, we have 4 beasts that speak of the same empires. It speaks of Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome. So chapter 2 goes with chapter 7. Then in the middle we have chapter 3 of Daniel. Remember chapter 3? Chapter 3 is the furnace, the fiery furnace, where the 3 friends were thrown into. That speaks of the protection of the Jewish people. That's the protection of the Jewish people. And it so happens that chapter 6 goes right along with it, because chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den, the protection of the Jewish prophet. So on the outside, 2 and 7, the kingdoms of the Gentiles. Then 3 and 6, protection of the Jewish people. Then at the heart of it, we have chapters 4 and 3. We have chapter 4, if you remember, this is Nebuchadnezzar going mad, tied to a tree, because that's the dream he had. And he goes mad for a number of years. And that's how the Lord deals and brings about the downfall of these Gentile kings. Same thing happens in chapter 5, when we see the writing on the wall. And that same night, the Babylonians were invaded and they were deposed. And God brought about the downfall of this Gentile king. So, Daniel is all about Hanukkah. Not only in the portion in chapter 11 when we have prophecy about Hanukkah, but even in the structure of the whole book, because it is speaking of the kingdoms that are going to eventually come and invade Jerusalem and attempt to go into the temple, and the Lord is going to come and bring about their downfall. All right, so let's look at a couple of things in Daniel. Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8, verse 15. So in chapter 8, we have 8 to 12, right? In 8 to 12, we go back to Hebrew. So this is speaking to the Jewish people. And in chapter 8, he has a vision, Daniel has a vision about a ram and a goat. The ram is Medo-Persia, and the goat is Greece. And so we're going to see then in 8:15 the interpretation of this vision that Daniel had. It says, when I, Daniel 8:15, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man, and I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Ulai River. And he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end, to the end times. Now, while he was talking to me, I sank into a deep sleep. That happens to me a lot. When I'm preaching, people just... Anyway, so... Now, while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand upright. And he said, Behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation. for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram which you saw with the two horns represent the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. That's Alexander the Great. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. Now we have a shift in verse 23. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. This is the Antiochus Epiphanes, who comes to invade Israel and places an image of himself. But just like when we read in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, that is speaking about the king of Tyre, but it really is speaking about Satan, because there are things there that, humanly speaking, are not possible. So it's the same here. Even though this is speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, there really is one behind him that will come in the end times. So this is speaking of the Antichrist as well. Verse 25. And through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence, and he will magnify himself in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the Prince of Princes, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future, the end times. Chapter 9 also speaks in relation to the end times, using the things that are going to happen during the time of Hanukkah. So Daniel 9:24, it says, 70 weeks, or actually 77s, 7 years, not just a week of days, but a week of years. So 77s have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That will be a total of 69. Even I can do that. 69 sevens. 69 times 7. How many years is that? Bunch of years. 400 and something. You see, that's the time between Daniel and the first century, and Yeshua coming as a man and entering Jerusalem to die. Verse 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come, that's the Antichrist, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. All right, this is a little confusing. Let's read it again. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. There is a prince who is to come, that's the Antichrist. His people are the same ones who are going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. So everybody says the Romans. They are the ones who destroyed the city. They are the ones who destroyed the temple. So the Antichrist is going to be from the Roman Empire. Oh. And so, is it going to be Italian? Is it Prince Charles? Sorry. Because it's going to be a European, right? From one of those countries that belong in the Roman Empire. And the European Union and the revived Roman Empire and all of this, right? Here's the thing. The people who destroyed the temple and the city, yes, they were Roman soldiers and they had Roman citizenship, but they were not Italian and they were not Europeans. What the Romans used to do was, whenever they would go in and conquer a land, they would raise up an army from the local land that they conquered. They didn't bring an army all the way from Italy. They brought an army that was close by. They brought an army from Syria and Turkey. That's the people who destroyed the temple and the city. And the prince who is to come comes from that people. Not from Europe, not from Rome, from the Middle East, from Syria and Turkey. Friends, the Antichrist is going to be a Muslim that is going to gather the nations around Israel to come in and invade Jerusalem and finally take the Temple Mount that they claim is theirs. I wish we had time to go into detail. Some other time we will. If you dig a little deeper in our YouTube channel, you will find a message I taught maybe 3-4 years ago on this very subject. Maybe it's time to bring it back. So again, the people of the prince, verse 26, who is to come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, for 7 years. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations he will come one who makes desolate. This is where Yeshua gets the phrase, the abomination of desolation. And he said, spoken of by the prophet Daniel. It's right here in Daniel 9:27. Even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. This is the Antichrist, and Yeshua in his coming is going to bring his downfall. Hanukkah is all over Daniel. Not only in chapter 11, but truly all over Daniel. I can speak to you of Daniel 10, I can speak to you of Daniel 11, and I can speak to you of Daniel 12. But we're out of time. We're out of time. So maybe next year. Next week. Friends, this theme is all over Scripture. So the Lord has actually taken what happened in Hanukkah and made it a blueprint for the end times. It is imperative. Not only that we see Hanukkah as a kid's holiday and But maybe we ought to understand the prophetic side of it and teach it to our kids, so we know the blueprint for the end times. Let's pray.